Welcome to edition 2 of the E-Talking podcast, the show that discusses the parts of Formula E that others cannot reach. Today, getting cranky. Was the Sanya E-Prix the first less than exciting race of the season, or have we all just become used to Jason Statham levels of action at all times? Nissan take a step forward, Oliver Rowland challenging for a win until the end, and Sebastian Buemi having a very Buemi sort of race, but what are the secrets behind their power unit? Sanya be a bit tidier. Formula E comes to a new venue and Nelson Piquet does some digging behind the beach. Is it naive to expect more change? Cheap and quick versus hot out of the F1 frying pan. Who is the best value driver in Formula E, and are teams changing their hiring strategy? Tired of winning? The rubber Formula E uses is actually a bit special. We dig in with a 50p piece. And finally, Andre the Giant versus Macho Man Randy Sam Bird. We'll discuss the drumming up of driver rivalries by Formula E and whether it's the wheeled version of the UFC, WWE or something else altogether. Okay, well, two guests in the studio today, and they are Peter Greaves and Hazel Southwell for the first time. So welcome back, Peter, and welcome, Hazel. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Right, so let's get cracking, shall we? I think everyone saw the race at Sanya, so what did you think? It was, from my point of view, it was a bit more of an F1 style race in that not everything happened that was stomach churning all at once, all the time. It was, it certainly didn't trigger any elements of my anxiety, and I kind of felt, yeah, this is something I could feasibly relax to at times. What was that your feeling? And is this was this the first kind of semi-boring race, or are we just overreacting based on the races that we've had previously? Feel free, whoever wants, to chip in.
So I think actually that there wasn't a lack of action, but there was a lack of video sight of the action. Which is a very unusual situation for Formula E and not how the broadcast generally works. A lot of things happened, but you didn't see them happening. So almost all the retirements you didn't really see, or they had to dig out a replay. I'm not really sure why. I don't know if maybe it was part of the just because there was that long period with the bridge, whether that made it more challenging to film, or if it was just there was some kind of like on-site logistical issue with filming. I don't know what it would be, or maybe, I mean, I don't know if there's just like quite high winds in Sanya, so they couldn't use the sort of, I mean, but then there is in Punta del Este and they cope there. So yeah, I'm not sure what it was. I don't actually think, because when you think about it, there were like 9 retirements. There was a lot of overtaking. There were some really pretty major fights. You know, even Rowland, even the top 3. So Verne got Rowland fairly early, but because of the red flags, because of the full course yellows, Rowland was able to reel him back in again and again. And although Rowland is less experienced in Formula E than Jev is, it's still, you know, there is a competitive fight between the two cars there. Da Costa wasn't far off Rowland, you know. I don't think it was short on action. I think unusually we were short on visuals of the action, because I actually thought it was just me because I wasn't there. But then you fundamentally see the same thing in the media centre as you do on the world feed. So yeah, I'm not quite sure what it was, and like, it's very unusual for Formula E to have that problem.
Yeah, I mean, so with Formula One, the problem we used to have before FOM took a proper charge of things was that the domestic TV directors would have control of the cameras most of the time. So if they wanted to focus on Senna running away rather than the battle for 6th or something, then they would do. But with Formula E, all the cameras are controlled by Formula E, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. So Formula E does its own broadcast, and I mean, to be honest, they are absolutely incredible most of the time. So I haven't seen a badly filmed race. Maybe Putrajaya was not ideal, but that was a long time ago as well. Or Battersea actually always looked quite crap, but there was sort of a limit to what you could do about Battersea, just because there's like trees in the way all over the place. and it was a very tight and not particularly great circuit. But yeah, I mean, given that they rock up to, so normally with like Formula One, with a lot of series that use Grand Prix circuits, there's like established camera points, and the circuit doesn't change. Whereas when it's a brand new circuit, so somewhere like Sanya or like Rome last year, then you've got to do a complete setup from nothing. And like usually I think they do it really well. So I thought they did a really good job in particularly Adria this year, which was obviously brand new circuit and all kinds of logistical things to get around because it's on like a hill. Or, you know, street circuits are quite difficult to film because obviously they're overshadowed by buildings. There's not thousands of vantage points, and the streets aren't built to have like a vista view in the same way that like parts of say Spa are, or whatever. So like normally I think they do an absolutely incredible job because you wouldn't know that it's something that has to be done very fast, and that they really get almost no opportunity to test it whatsoever. Whereas, I mean, Shakedown, the first few minutes of Shakedown are basically, that's why Shakedown isn't like immediately televised, but that's them setting up the cameras. They get like 7 minutes of Shakedown. So, yeah, I think they do a mind-boggling job usually, but somehow it was really off at this race. So, like, I hate saying this, but I couldn't tell when they came off full course yellow.
Well, yeah. I mean, there were certainly some challenges that you could see on the screen that you didn't normally see. I mean, I think that's the marvel of Formula E and how it's organised, that you don't normally see the strings attached. Peter, I'm wondering if part of the problem here is that street circuits, you know, in beautiful places like Sanya apparently is, and like Hong Kong undoubtedly is, for example. You know, but we don't see that much of the scenery from the track because of these walls. Do you think maybe the solution is eventually, and I hate to sound like Donald Trump here, to develop a big, beautiful wall that actually you can see through and see the city from?
Oh, well, that is an interesting question. You have a point because, of course, at the start of Formula One and the start of Formula E as well, I noticed it today. They do a flyover, show a bit of a general, you know, vibe of the city and all that sort of stuff. So I didn't feel too hard done by, but I do agree that I suppose once you're within the track limits, you don't see a great deal of the external visual. And one of the things I did pick up on today actually was that I thought once I saw the track layout drawn out with those two large sort of semi-straights, I thought that it was going to be far more like Baku, so for example, where they film them coming down the long straight, and there'd be quite a drama into the braking zone or something like that. I don't recall seeing anything like that particularly, but again, you know, I don't want to be massively critical because, like you say, they put these things up at incredibly short notice, get them all in, put a race circuit in a city, in a functioning city, and then have to get out again. So maybe there's some lessons they might learn here, because it did seem, I agree, there were quite a few battles, quite a lot of banging again, which we may discuss later on or not. There was Di Grassi missing the activation zone, which we did see, to be fair, you know, and a few other incidents and close calls. I didn't feel too hard done by for Action. I think the race maybe was slightly just a tiny anticlimax just because of the sheer thrill that we've had over, say, the last 3 or 4 races, where it seems to we seem to run out of superlatives for the amount of things that have happened. And I did think it was going to crash back down to earth at some point. But yeah, having said that, it wasn't a bad race. I think it was just one of those maybe that was affected by coverage and being slightly less action-packed as the ones that came before.
Yeah, always happy to talk about banging, by the way. Talking of which, we will be talking about Eduardo Mortara later on. Yeah, so I think maybe my expectations of the race were that because I just kind of become used to that non-stop action, that that we would see that all the time. But the explanation maybe that Hazel you've given gives me a better idea of why that wasn't so, and I'm sure that'll be corrected for next season when they come back there. Moving on then, Nissan has a much improved race this time, and Oliver Rowland was on pole for the first time, I think, in his Formula E career, and did a fantastic job, was challenging for the lead right until the end. There was that question over whether he would actually need to, and whether Jean-Eric Vergne would get the penalty or not, but in the end, well-deserved second place, could have been a win, and Sebastian Buemi could have been in the conversation, if not for his general Bueminess in this season. So I guess we come back really to the possibly overhyped issue of Nissan's power unit, which seems a bit revolutionary. So Sam Smith and a few other journalists did some digging into it. What can we find out, Hazel, about what's different about Nissan's power unit compared to the others on the grid?
So I actually asked the head of the sort of Nissan side of Nissan Edams this at testing, because Nissan are using a setup that has been tried and failed repeatedly. So quite a few teams tried to, when Formula E first opened, construction of the powertrain, because in the first season everyone had a generic powertrain, but then in the second season you could construct your own. Quite a few teams experimented with having two motor generator units. Now that's not the same as in a Formula 1 car having the MGU-K and the MGU-H. It's having two basically MGU-K. So all the motor generator unit in a Formula E car is the whole powertrain. So it's the regeneration system, and it's the system that takes energy from the battery and pushes it into the rear axle to power the car. So it's not the gearbox, but it's basically everything else about the actual drive of the car. And yeah, a few teams have tried having two motor generator units. In theory, it would be ideal because you can sort of get more dispersed power. You can probably make them a little bit more efficient. But every time it ended up overweight. So DS Virgin had one in season 2, and their car was massively overweight because of the obviously two MGU weigh more than a single one. Neo or Nextev that became Neo tried right until the end of last season. It never was great shakes. They just couldn't. They could never make up for the weight and the complexity of them compared to simply getting an efficient, powerful single MGU. Now, Nissan are not new to making electric vehicles. Nissan make the best-selling electric vehicle in the entire world, the Leaf. And they are a company who really know their way around EVs. So it isn't, to me, an enormous surprise that they have managed to make this work where other manufacturers have failed. And that they were daring enough to do it. What they're doing is not cheating. So I've got the technical regulations up because I'm a cool and fun person. And you can have two MGUs. There's no issue with that. The MGU, or each MGU has to operate together. So you can't have them delivering different power loads or so you can't have one regenerating whilst the other is forcing power into the wheel, aside from the fact that would be a really great way to spin the car incredibly fast. But yeah, so they have to work in absolute synchronicity. That's a difficult word to say after you've been up all night. But yeah, they're not there's nothing illegal or against the technical regulations to what Nissan are doing. It's something that other teams have really tried to do, and they couldn't do it. There's sort of like mild controversy is that people think they might be using them to operate separately in order to give one of the, basically get the MGU to spin itself up as an additional flywheel energy store.
Do you think I can ask a quick question at this point?
Yeah,
so
of course.
I'm not a particularly technical. I've been into motor racing for pretty much my entire life since I was about 8 or 9. But I've always, I'm more of a software guy, which means I probably should show more of an interest in that side of Formula E for sure. But I'm not very good in terms of the actual technology under the hood, as it were. With the Nissan, with this sort of with the FIA wanting to look into what Nissan are doing, do you think it is for that reason that you were saying, where maybe they've succeeded where others have failed, and they want to look at it in the name of progress of the series? Or do you think they're looking at it because of Nissan's sort of recent improvement? I noticed Roland's obviously had a couple of great starts. He's been on pole position as well now. Do you think it's a matter of their circumstances, or do you think it is just a general query into their tech?
Or number three, is it because the FIA likes to ban things that do well?
So I actually think it's none of those. I think it's option 4, which is the other teams have got very sort of like antsy about it, and they want clarity on it. Now, I think it's, well, I don't know. So Nissan are the only team, the only manufacturer running two motors, unless whatever atrocity is in the back of the Dragon does, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't. I can't pretend that I've looked into what they're doing this season. Probably mounting it backwards again. So I think the prompt for the FIA to clarify comes entirely from other teams. This is sort of come in later in the season. It's completely true. So Nissan haven't been very fast, and if Nissan were fast, Sebastian Buemi would be winning. So if you came into Formula E in season 4, then you don't remember this, but Sebastian Buemi is the most successful Formula E driver ever, and he still is, even though he hasn't won for a season and a half. Like, he's just absolutely unstoppable, especially in season 2 and 3. It was unbelievable how fast he was. He did have a very good car, but so, you know, they weren't. Renault were ahead in season 2, and they were at the front in season 3, but they weren't. It wasn't like the difference between like Mercedes and everyone else in 2014 or something.
We should probably explain, just to not be too inside baseball, for those who are new to Formula E. Renault is part of the Renault-Nissan group, and they switched the affiliation to Nissan this season.
Yes, yeah.
Anyway,
so the team that are now Nissan used to be Renault, and yeah, I think Seb definitely took a confidence hit last season because he couldn't get the car to do what he wanted, and he even said that he wasn't fast enough, and that it wasn't exclusively the car, because you could see Jev was winning with the same powertrain. But if Nissan had a magically incredible car and were magically incredibly able to set things up perfect for every race, then Sebastian would be leading the championship. I don't think you can get away from that.
I mean, people talk about the.
I do think this is a little bit weird, but yeah, I mean, they have made something work where nobody else has, and the other teams are mega antsy about it. So in Hong Kong, there was this like massive air of like paranoia all around the paddock. Everyone was convinced that every other manufacturer had something that they shouldn't. So like there were also all kinds of questions about Audi, and whether you could see something on the floor of the cars, whether you could see an additional thing in the back of the Nissan this flywheel. Lucas was absolutely adamant that he could during free practice and during shakedown, but the cars are homologated. They've been looked at. They've been looked at repeatedly. They're homologated at the start of the season or pre-season. So homologation is done before pre-season testing, just to sort of like clear that nobody's got like a rocket in the car. And then it's done after pre-season testing to completely lock down everything that's in the car, and you can't make significant changes to it after that. So some things like the differential are set from that point onwards. They get scrutinized every race. So I think this is a bit of like everyone's just having like a big snit about. I mean, there's lots of manufacturers in the series now, and so you are getting situations that you haven't seen before where all of the manufacturers get like their knickers in a twist about some other manufacturer possibly doing something else, and it gets into a headline because it's like teams go to the FIA about Nissan cheating, and it's like, no, they're just asking what's going on because they like. I totally get why, and it's part of the game and it's part of the sport, but like they have to ask about it, but that doesn't mean it's a thing.
Just to ask one clarifying question on that as well, on the tech side. Am I right or am I completely wrong, because I'm not tech either, in saying that a Tesla has 4 MGUs, one driving each wheel, or is that off the ball?
I think some of them do. But certainly, so like Robocar does.
That would be illegal in Formula E.
Yeah, you can only have up to a maximum of 2, and they have to only go to the rear axle.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt a minute ago. They call it overzealous host syndrome. I just had a question related to an article you wrote last season entitled "What the hell has happened to Sebastian Buemi" for Drive Tribe, and I really liked it, but it referenced the famous scene from the movie in season 3 where Buemi decided to confront half the grid and shout "Did you hit me?" repeatedly at Daniel Abt, or I think it was "You did hit me." It was seen at the time as part of a general sort of existential crisis he seemed to be having with not being the top dog. But I'm wondering. I mean, because I've been watching NASCAR videos on YouTube, and one thing that is constant is that when a team falls into a bit of a rough patch, the driver generally does with his own abilities and skills as well. Are we seeing partly Buemi deteriorate as a driver based on the fact that Roland's been the one picking up the good pieces when they've happened?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Seb just won the 24 Hours Du Mans like last year. He's winning consistently in Toyota. I don't think his brain is falling apart, despite substantial exposure to Fernando Alonso. I think Sebastian's very realistic about the situation that needs to be rebuilt. Nissan, and the fact that they started the season on a real back foot. They lost all the pre-season testing. Basically, Sebastian was running 2 cars and working his absolute arse off after Alexander Albon left for Toro Rosso at the start of the week of pre-season testing, which really, really screwed Nissan. Pre-season testing is your final chance to set up the car, so Sebastian did it for both of them, not even knowing who was going to drive the second one. And yeah, I think also that Nissan are new to Formula E. Nissan are not new to electric vehicles, but being able to make a really good electric vehicle doesn't mean you can automatically play a really good game of Formula E, the sport, especially given it's just changed formats very substantially. So I don't think Seb's sort of like off the ball or having a meltdown. The famous Montreal scene is... I really felt for him because I also occasionally have like terrible temper flares, and I think anyone who has ever had a bit of a meltdown, especially in public. Probably winced in sympathy with him. Like, he was being awful, but also the reason that nobody came and retrieved him and sort of put a stop to it was because Nico Prost's car was on fire in the Renault Edam's garage.
Okay.
So, like, normally if a driver starts going, or normally he would have been grabbed the second he got out the car by a PR and sort of like walked away and given a cup of juice and told to sit down. And have a big rant at the back of the garage. But yeah, it was a very difficult situation for him. But I mean, he came to the after party.
Yeah.
And Seb, like, he's quite he's pretty mentally resilient. He had put up with Lucas ribbing him for the entire season, and Lucas is like a master of like getting inside other people's heads and just like worrying at them.
Well, he seems to be a bit of a Twitter troll right now. Yes.
Oh yeah, I mean he loves the bounce. But yeah, I don't think Seb is necessarily sort of like falling apart. And I think certainly, he's got his head in it. I just think that Nissan are a new team, basically. And also, last year there were lots and lots of complications with Edams. So Edams as a team had quite a substantial wobble because Jean-Paul Driot was away for almost the whole season. He only came back in Paris. So over 2/3 of the season, he was away because he was really unwell. So I think that left them with a really difficult situation, especially after they'd set the car up wrong following pre-season testing.
Yeah. Jean-Paul Driot, by the way, the CEO of DAMS, ever since they were called Driot Arnoux Motorsport, which is
is that where it comes from?
Apparently this, and I recoiled in amazement because I realised, hang on, that was Alain Prost's team last season, because, of course, Arnoux and Prost have had a long-running pitch battle for about 30 or 35 years now. But, yeah, apparently so.
Ah, well, there you go. Yeah. I think the idea that these motors have a flywheel element is a little bit weird, to be honest. So the only reason that it would be advantageous, so a flywheel is a simple energy store. It's one of the earliest forms of electrical energy store, and it's basically, or any form of energy store comes to that. You can make one yourself. So if you get a hairband or an elastic band and like wrap it around one end of your finger and then twist the other end until you've got a load of like little twists in the elastic, and then let it go and you see it like unravel, that's fundamentally a very basic flywheel. So yeah, it's something that works along those lines. Obviously, anything in a Formula E MGU is going to be a lot fancier than that. I don't think they've gone down Claire's accessories and got a load of toggles, but it would be something along those lines. So something that's able to store a little bit extra energy in regen, I guess, or that's able to use it very efficiently and as a process of discharging. Why that would be an advantage, I really honestly do not know, because the battery is more than big enough for the racing. You saw everyone was finishing with double figures of energy. Today in Sanya, Antonio finished with over 20%, I think, which is bonkers. So yeah, it's not the same as in previous seasons. Being able to store a tiny little extra bit of energy would have been amazing, a real advantage. But yeah, I mean, unless it just means it can be retransmitted faster, but then a flywheel is very slow compared to just moving around and charging and discharging a battery. Yeah, I don't really get it. I think it will be interesting what the FIA says. But yeah, I think basically everyone's just running around a bit paranoid at the moment.
Yeah.
And Nissan happened to be sort of caught in the crossfire of that.
And actually, the flywheel was attempted by Williams back in the early days of KERS, I think in 2006 or some 2007. They abandoned it, I think, because it cost too much, and they went for a more sort of typical KERS system. But yeah, so supposedly that was a money spinner for them for a few years. They would sell the flywheel KERS to commercial projects that wanted it. But yeah, it's interesting that the old-fashioned flywheel might have made a comeback. Okay, next topic. As the Formula E teams and drivers went to Sanya and got settled into their hotels, Nelson Piquet Jr., Season 1 champion, but I think winless since then, decided to...
40 races without a win.
Yeah, I mean, that's... Getting on to late period Richard Petty levels of is he ever going to come back? But I mean, yeah, he took a walk down to the beach and being the environmental crusader that he apparently is, he took a video and posted it on Twitter with lots of WTFs about the amount of plastic that the authorities had seemingly taken from the beach and simply dumped behind it, behind a grass border, a grass verge. So, I mean, quite apart from this being kind of corporate suicide on Piquet's behalf, I mean, it's kind of like if he went to Saudi Arabia and counted the number of women drivers on the main highway. It also, I don't know, it highlighted for me that there is still a major environmental problem, even though Envision Virgin Racing have launched their Get Plastics Off the Beach campaign, and even though Formula E, which is supposedly the world's cleanest form of motorsport, has gone to a Chinese beach resort. Are we expecting too much, Peter, that Formula E can make big changes in how countries and how people who live there view the environment and how they care for it?
Well, it's nice to, by the way, it was great listening to some expert insider knowledge about what was going on with the powertrains there, because I had pretty much nothing to add to that conversation whatsoever. So it was fantastic to hear that. So thank you both for discussing that.
No, Poppy, don't eat the crisps. Sorry, my cat eating the crisps.
So are you telling me cats can't eat crisps? That's just debunked.
Well, they get, surely they can enjoy them as much as anybody else.
She does. She's a huge crisp fan.
Fantastic. So yes, I'll let you know if my dog starts eating anything inappropriate in the vicinity. I mean, it's most likely to be my shoes or my slippers or something. Yeah. So I saw the video in question. It sort of reminded me immediately of the video that was released last week by a certain Jeremy Clarkson as well, where he was sat in a boat whinging about Chinese plastics. But the thing is, on the Formula E front, I suppose it does look bad if you go to a place where they may appear to be covering up how much environmental damage they're causing, or how much litter or debris or pollution or whatever is in their area. Now, with China, of course, you're always going to get a sanitized version of the truth, or usually anyway. So the fact that Pico was out there and, you know, like you say, taking a PR risk, is he really meant to be doing something like that in a place that Formula E is hosting a race? It looked to me potentially, I think the video was maybe a little low quality, the version I saw, or I don't know if my internet was going slow at the time, but it seemed almost like they'd combed the beach for plastic, and instead of taking it away, they'd just chucked it into the dunes and so on behind and next to the path. So really, it was to clean the beach up, perhaps. Not that there's ever an excuse to leave that sort of mess around. It must be pretty unpleasant, especially if it's a place like Sanya is a holiday resort. So I can't imagine people really want to be trampling around in all of that. But it's one of those things where I feel that it is an issue. Of course, it's an issue. Formula One should nice Freudian slip. Formula E should certainly be speaking out against these things, encouraging people to go for greener forms of transport, for recycling recycling for all sorts of environmentally beneficial issues. But likewise, I'm in this horrible position where I don't feel like I can sit in the Western world and criticize everything that's going on there. Because I'm pretty sure that we've been guilty of plenty ourselves as well, that people aren't bothering to highlight on Twitter or on their stories. So I feel like Formula E should be responsible. It certainly should be showing that it is responsible certainly in its message, maybe in its advertising, in the charities it chooses to support, and so on. But it is at slightly cross purposes, I feel, and I don't know. I don't know how you guys feel about this, and it might be a talking point, but it might be slightly at cross purposes with the FIA, because the thing is, the FIA tend to go towards progress. So as with Formula One we've seen before, as with Formula E we're seeing now, they will tend to go where the money is, the emerging markets, the countries that are resurgent in the world. They're sort of swaying towards those. And a lot of those don't have perfect records in terms of things like human rights and how they're dealing with pollution and so on.
Cough,
so,
cough, Bahrain, cough, cough.
Yeah, so it's one of those situations where I feel like the FIA wants to go into emerging markets. Not all of the things that are going on there are totally above board and respectable, but they want to go to those markets nevertheless. And Formula E also has a duty to say, look, we're racing with battery-powered cars. You should be responsible too. But it feels like it's slightly at cross purposes because a lot of these emerging countries maybe aren't dealing with their waste in a responsible manner.
Hazel, any thoughts on Formula E's environmental credentials and whether it's damaged by this kind of thing and by this kind of video?
I mean, firstly, I used to live in the river. I used to live on a boat in London, and let me tell you, there is a lot more trash in the average British river. I don't think we can put this on developing countries, on kind of like countries outside Western Europe or the northwestern world. Basically everywhere is an absolute tip. And there's also a huge amount of technology, especially in developing countries. There's some really good projects in Africa and India in particular, or across Africa and in India, where people are using particularly plastic waste in incredibly innovative ways that we don't in what you might call the developed world, the first world, simply because we can just throw it away and get more. So I think, I think you have to divorce that from a lot of talking about this, especially because we actually send all our recycling to China to process from Western Europe. Does it damage environmental credentials to turn up somewhere like that? I don't think it does. So if you take, for instance, the example of the upcoming Extreme E series, the point of that is to go and do rallycross style racing in the most destroyed places on Earth. The places that are most vulnerable, are most utterly screwed by climate change, in order to showcase them. Going to somewhere like Saudi Arabia, that's one of the countries that is most vulnerable to climate change and consistently scores lowest or second lowest on countries addressing climate change. It's somewhere that we should rock up. We can't just go to places that fundamentally already are on board. Otherwise we just go to Oslo every week. Yeah. But Albania is the cleanest energy country in the world.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, 100% clean energy. Most of it's like hydrothermal and hydroelectric, but still, no coal or gas fired. But yeah, so if we're going to the US, then we can kind of go anywhere in terms of like addressing it and bringing the fight of climate change and taking it to the places where you have to actually take it on board. So yeah, I don't think it loses any environmental credibility. And I think realistically, you know, there's horrible amounts of trash everywhere. Yeah, PK found some on the beach in Sanya. It's a resort. I mean, I don't actually think it had been moved off the beach. I think it's just people are fools and like collect up all their rubbish and like chuck it off the beach. So I'm not sure it was sort of necessarily municipal. It just looked like loads of garbage that people had just started chucking there because they couldn't find another bin, or couldn't be bothered to find another bin.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I just sort of I saw the sheer amount of it and thought maybe this looks like a cleanup operation, but you may well be right. That may be the attitude if it starts.
I mean, just think of any park bin on a summer's day.
Yep, absolutely.
And in Sanya, I would imagine it's summer most of the time, isn't it?
Yeah, basically. I mean, and it's a resort town. You know, it's mostly visited by wealthy Russians, or by wealthy people from across China, and there is a pretty high correlation between being too rich to care and wrecking things. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's important to show it. I hope that it got cleared up and that you know someone got the gloves out from Formula E, that maybe people got a few bin bags and cleared it. But realistically, it's a problem that's everywhere, and you've got to go to the places where it's happening. There's certainly really quite depressing amounts of trash in, say, Punta del Este, given it's a very exceptionally beautiful peninsula in the Atlantic, on the coast of Uruguay. But for starters, like, trash just washes up on beaches because there's a lot of it in the ocean, and also just people just seem to hate taking their stuff home from the beach. So yeah, people just sort of like bury it in the sand or chuck it against a wall or something. Yeah, I hope it got cleared up. I hope in general that people can address rubbish issues and sort of like stop using bodies of water or areas near bodies of water as trash cans. But it is an unfortunately global trend.
Extreme E is another topic altogether, and I feel like we could fill an entire podcast investigating and looking into you know, the reasons behind that being a good idea or not. But unfortunately, we don't have time for that. I've got heaps of questions about that. Maybe if you ever got time to come back on, you can talk about Extreme E for a while, Hazel.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Cool. I wanted to talk also about the increasing trend, it seems to me, of either Formula E veterans, as in people who've been racing every season since the start, such as Degrassi, Bird, Buemi, basically anyone but Nelson Piquet Jr., and also people who are becoming specialists at streets, like Eduardo Mortara, who's won 10 times in Macau and was also, after Hong Kong, in the conversation for the championship, as I wrote on my blog. I mean, Peter, let's start with you on this one. Do you think Formula E is moving towards being a specialist sport, and will this mean fewer drivers braving it out of F1 like Felipe Massa and then finding they struggle in a sport that's mostly full of hardcore EV drivers?
This is quite a difficult one, and I'll be very interested to hear in a minute what Hazel has to say about it because of her sort of involvement directly with the sport and the drivers, and she's probably far more knowledgeable than me on this subject. But from what I've seen personally, naturally, some of these seasoned drivers that we are talking about now, and I think all of the champions have been involved in Formula One at some point or another in their career. They have some degree of F1 experience. So I don't think necessarily the transition is the issue, but I do notice that obviously there was so much weight put behind Felipe Massa, Stoffel Van Dorn. Obviously, he's racking up the fan boost at every race. There was a lot of weight put on them. Now, I don't want to trash talk anybody because there's various different reasons why people might be performing, might not be performing. Also, I don't know how easily drivable or how much you have to alter your style from other formulas or other types of racing to Formula E, and that's something I'll be interested to hear about in a moment, I'm sure. But yeah, Wehrlein seems to have adjusted, shall we say, the best, in my opinion, anyway. But I'm not sure whether that's just sort of a youthful disregard for, he's just going for it. And he just happens to be a talented individual, and he doesn't particularly care what's come before. He's just giving it a go. But I think he seems to be the one who's adjusted the best. But like I say, a lot of those other guys like Piquet Jr., Buemi, De Grassi, Verne, so on, have had some degree of Formula One experience. So I don't think it's necessarily something that Formula One drivers should be looking at avoiding. Say, oh no, I don't want to look embarrassed in Formula E, I just won't try it. I don't think that's the case, but it's certainly, the trend is far too obvious to ignore that the people who have been in it the longest seem to be excelling now the Gen 2 cars have come along. So maybe there is an argument for the longer you're in it or the more experience you have of this type of racing, the more you'll excel at it.
Yeah, and also one thing that was mentioned during the commentary for Sanya was that one of the German marques coming in next season, either Porsche or Mercedes, people think Porsche, is looking into Mitch Evans as the second driver, which would be fantastic because he's a driver who's excels in junior formulae, but he's not a star name. He's not someone who's come straight out of F1 or sports cars or something. And I mean, just the idea of someone who's been really treading the boards in Formula E for such a long time being considered by one of the big marques because of his performances, I think is a great thing. But yeah, Hazel, what are your thoughts?
I think the Evans to Porsche thing is super weird. I think it comes from the Mark Webber Porsche link, because Mark Webber's his mentor / to some degree his manager. But as far as I know, he's with a big manufacturer. He's earning enough that he's moved to Monaco. I mean, it's just about. Porsche have drivers coming out their ears.
I was going to say, Brendan Hartley's going to be disappointed if he's not picked, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, Porsche have. They've got their whole ex-LMP1 squad. They've got a huge number of GT drivers. I just can't see that they'd poach Evans. I'm not really sure where that one's coming from, and it's certainly not something I've heard.
Okay, but what about the general principle of people like Evans, Mortara and so on now seeming more appealing to some people than the big star names with less experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure they should be. So I think, you can see it with Felipe Nasr. Didn't have an amazing record in Formula One. He wasn't bad, but the Sauber was dreadful. But he's gone on to be very successful in stock cars, in sports cars. He's really been extremely good in IMSA, and he's a highly rated driver. Boot out Maximilian Günther, who had geared his whole campaign from the start of last season onwards into moving into Formula E, to becoming a Formula E specialist. He absolutely binned off, approaching F1 or approaching any other championships in order to get to Formula E. Spent the whole of last year in the Dragon Simulator, came to every race, was very attentive, was very much like concentrating on learning Formula E above anything else. And Gunter was getting better results. Like he wasn't lucky this year, but and Naz's car is critically broken, which is why there was the accident with the Mahindras in Hong Kong, and then it didn't get further than a few hundred meters this race. But
so you mean they haven't repaired it since Hong Kong?
No, you can't.
Okay, that's you see, again, I'm used to F1 where you can take it back to the factory and take it apart, but you can't do that here.
No, I mean, aside from the fact it will have been in transit, so it won't have gone back to the factory. So cars will go back to the factory for the first time between this race and Rome, or for the first time for a while. But yeah, it won't have been in the factory. But also, if you want to replace bits of a Formula E car, it has to be rehomologated. So you need to give 30 to 60 days notice in order to book in an FIA homologation. So Di Grassi last year had a absolutely woeful start to the season because he had a broken inverter, so his car fundamentally did not run. And which is obviously a bit crucial if you're trying to drive it. So yeah, he had to wait for ages to get the Joker inverter put in. In theory, you could take a grid penalty and just keep replacing it, but you've still got to have it rehomologated at some point. So yeah, it's just a function of the way that the championship works. In Formula E, DHL move the cars and freight around sort of as a single unit. It doesn't get freighted to and from manufacturers' factories.
Right. And obviously, the budgets are so much lower that manufacturers are not even going to are not anyway going to send a special shipment from or back to their factory, just like F1 teams might do to Australia or something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if Dragon have the parts to replace it.
Yeah, actually, I wonder if maybe the I hate to say mismanagement, but it feels like that at Dragon, in terms of their driver selection and, well, everything is an aberration, or if I mean, what's going on there? Because, like you say, they've dropped a specialist driver who wants to be an EV specialist for someone who doesn't seem to know the machinery properly yet.
No, and NASA will probably get the hang of it, but he had never driven a Formula E car before he got into one at Mexico.
Doesn't that make the statement that Gunter said when I knew I wasn't going to be racing the whole season and all this sort of stuff?
I mean, that's just absolute. Absolutely untrue.
Yeah, and it seemed so strange. And I mean, I'm not there with the drivers, and I'm not internal to this process, but when that statement came out, it just completely took me it took me by surprise. I was thinking, there's no way that is what's happened here. And unfortunately, I mean, I didn't really know much about the mechanical issue that you're talking about, but before this podcast, I was making notes, and I just put not been impressed with NASA. So I mean, it's that was my note on that front. So I think, but the fact is, yeah, it's interesting that came up anyway, because I was going to ask about that situation. It just fascinated me that Gunter was like, yeah, I knew I didn't have a full contract for the season and so on. And then NASA seems to have come in and maybe not all his fault, but seems to have come in, and he doesn't seem like the right guy for that drive at the moment anyway.
No, I mean, it's very difficult to. The Dragon team have a difficult working environment, and it's Jay Penske. who
there's probably
creates
a
that.
limit to what you can. You probably know more than you can say, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, well, I know. Look at what happened with Porsche at the start of last year. So Dragon had a partnership with Porsche. Noriani was in the car in Hong Kong. Things went extremely south. It was an appalling weekend for them. Not any of the mechanics or engineer or team workers' fault, or the drivers. Their relationship broke down, and Porsche were out before Christmas. So, in fact, they were out before the end of the weekend. And the reason that they were out, the reason that Jerome D'Ambrosio has departed from Mahindra finally when the seat became available, the reason that they've had repeated sort of odd goings on in it is Jay Penske. And
that's weird. That's weird because obviously he comes.
He's also why the team exists. So
yeah, I mean, it's weird because I wonder if his focus is too much on Rolling Stone magazine, or if it would be better if more of his focus was on Rolling Stone magazine. Because I mean, he comes from this tremendous, if you like, obviously his father is the most successful IndyCar constructor ever, and it's just weird that none of that kind of excellence seems to have gone down the generations.
I mean, I don't think it's sort of a, Formula E and IndyCar are very different beasts. He has quite a volatile personality. Anyone who's been in the paddock knows that. Fair enough, so do I. As anyone who's accidentally got me in the wrong mood on Twitter will know. And yeah, I think whatever is going on at Dragon at the moment is quite... sorry, there's a nice cream truck going past my house.
Well, no, it's fine. It's proper electric power on that music, isn't it?
Yeah, this is giving the whole thing a slightly surreal and sinister air. But yeah,
like one of those dream sequences from a '60s film now.
Yes.
Might I just say, by the way, as it's now topical, I've noticed recently, I don't know whether it's a cover for another kind of organisation altogether, but I live in Liverpool, and there is an ice cream van that has been going around in the winter months, 8 o'clock at night, pitch black, playing the music full blast. So they must be doing a roaring trade. Yeah. So they must be doing a roaring trade to still be doing that.
Or it's MI6 or something.
But yeah, just to end on Dragon, I mean the whole of that is a very weird, disruptive mess. I think there's a slight tendency, and some other teams also have this idea. I don't want to single out Dragon, but they are sort of the lowest budget team that somewhat try and do this. They are also the lowest budget team on the grid, full stop. And one of the only ones without any kind of large manufacturer behind them now. In fact, the only. Yeah, the fact that they're not in front of Audi is not that big a shock. Whether it would flatter them to become a customer team is something that is quite interesting, and why they haven't, I think, is another sort of question. But I think there's a slight tendency to assume that you can play a bit hard and fast with the rules, which you really can't in Formula E. There's all kinds of things like this homologation issue that you just can't get around, and it's very, very difficult. It's very challenging and it's very frustrating. So I do understand again that everyone in the team is working very hard, including Jay Penske. Regardless of whether I think he and I would be best pals on a road trip. The whole team is working very hard to try and address the situation that it's in. Nobody is really miserable losing for several seasons in a row. Nobody wants to do that. You can see how incredibly buoyed up the Andretti team is by having got off the back. because that really was grinding them down, and it was grinding down Antonio and everybody there. So yeah, I think Dragon are in a difficult situation, and some erratic decisions are being made, some very sudden decisions are being made, especially about driver lineup, as per NASA coming in. But just to come back to the specialist question, so I think what makes a Formula E driver is a really interesting question. I sort of tried to look at it last year, because if you look at somebody like Eduardo Mortara, although he's a very highly rated driver, although he's somebody who Toto Wolff said if he couldn't get Bottas, he was going to put him into the Mercedes F1 seat. And Eduardo is very fast, he's very skilled, he's very beautiful, like really disturbingly beautiful. Regular humans shouldn't have to stand near him or really look at him. But he's a really lovely guy as well, and he's super easy to work with. You can see the team absolutely adore him. But the fact that he's really good at Formula E is sort of a surprise. Like, that comes out of nowhere. There's people with the same background as Eduardo who haven't really got it together in Formula E. There's people like, so if you look at Robin Freins, who is a highly rated driver, he wasn't in for season 4 after BMW came into Andretti, and his Audi clash happened. But now he's back. I mean, people really, really rate Robin as one of the best drivers in Formula E. He also comes from a GT background, same as Eduardo Mortara has been for years. But then you look at other people like Mitch Evans, who came from junior single-seaters. GP2 car is absolutely nothing like a Formula E car whatsoever. But he got into it really quick, and beat his teammate Adam Carroll, who actually, to be fair, had horrific luck. But the car was such a dog. It's really hard to say anyone beat anyone in that first Jaguar. But yeah, Adam Carroll came from a development background, came from working on pushing race cars forwards, and from a GT background in WEC. And then you look at, say, Luca Filippi, came from a similar background and absolutely bombed at Neo last year. But yeah, it's very difficult. Or say Tom Dillman came from Formula Renault. Like, it's really difficult to say what would make a good driver. And you do get people like Jev, who, okay, it took him 3 seasons to get up to speed, but he's an ex-F1 off-cut. Or Buemi, who took 0 seasons to be extraordinarily dominant. So yeah, will teams stop taking risks on big names? I mean, probably not. If Hamilton does decide, he had a spin in the Mercedes EQ. If he suddenly decided he wanted a more relaxed race program and came to Formula E, you can bet people would be scrabbling. I don't think anyone can afford him, but that's a separate issue. I think there's so many things to Formula E, because you look at someone like Paffett and Van Dorn. Paffett just won DTM with the team that he's in now, literally exactly the same team, the exact same people. They celebrated his DTM win with him and then came to Valencia. The HWA, hugely respected team for running customer cars. They're running a customer car in Formula E. It's taken them a while to get their heads around it. Stoffel Van Dorn, very highly respected, particularly was extraordinarily impressive in the last spec series he was in. He won GP2 by over 150 points to the second place racer, and that was even with one race being cancelled. So that's really quite extraordinary. Like, there's a bigger margin than, say, Lewis Hamilton. And he looked just as impressive as Lewis in there. But he struggled because the team know perfectly well that they're still finding their feet. They're still getting their heads around the powertrain. They're still getting their heads around the setup. They're still getting their heads around the race weekend. They're still, or the race day. You don't get a whole weekend. And when you look at so we know Lucas di Grassi is fast, but he looked like an absolute ass for a lot of the start of last season. Because his car kept failing in comedic ways. Things were going wrong at Audi. Stuff kept just going minorly wrong, but in a way that looks. It has to be major in Formula E because there's so little time and everything has to be so precise. I think it's very hard to say when it's a driver and when it's a team. When it's a set of stacked circumstances in Formula E, and certainly I don't think there's any particular background that you can point to and say those drivers are really good value and always succeed in Formula E. Those drivers might be more expensive and won't. I think it's. I think certainly driver attitude is a big thing, but I don't think that that's lacking in, say, Massa. He really wants to win and he's very highly motivated. He's very interested in Formula E. He's very comfy in the team. So I don't think he's sort of losing out in that respect. But whereas you could say Andre Lotterer when he first came in was kind of taking the piss a bit. He had a really shocking attitude for his first 3 races, and then he embarrassed himself so badly in Marrakesh that he got in the simulator for a week, so that he could stop making a fool of himself basically at Formula E, and then Santiago happened.
So it's a question of commitment as much as talent then?
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, because they all have second jobs in WEC and Brazilian stock cars and whatever. I don't know. I think what makes a driver good at Formula E, or some of them don't. So if you look at, say, Evans, Formula E is his only race series, and I'm sure it does help him that he concentrates on that. But yeah, it would be impossible, I think, to pin down the qualities that mean somebody will succeed in Formula E at this stage.
Okay, I just got on my script here, tyres and filth. So I think I'm just going to let you talk about the Formula E tyre and why it's different from a road tyre and what's particularly special about it, Hazel.
Okay, so Formula E tyres are road tyres. I think technically you can actually buy the Formula E tyre from Michelin. It's a ridged tyre. It's a standard rim, same as you could get on a road car. And it's got a tread to it, so it doesn't look like normal racing tyres are great big chunky boys, which are about the width of, I don't know, easily my shoulders. And they're perfectly smooth. They're very, very soft compounds. They work by moving as a single kind of almost semi-liquid thing. So when it goes around a corner, the tyre achieves grip by literally sort of shifting a little bit. If you push your fingers together, the pad of your thumb and your first finger together, and then kind of move them away from each other, or move them against each other, and you see how the flesh of the pad of your finger moves. That's sort of what slick tyres do. Formula E tyres are ridged, so they don't really do that. They sort of go more like a hairbrush hitting the track. Everything moves hopefully in synchronicity, but as each segment of the ridging hits the track at a different point, or it all hits in sequence. And as a consequence, they, especially because they are a relatively hard road compound, they've actually got a very small operating window. And this year, that operating window is even smaller. So the operating window in terms of tyres is the temperature of the tyre, so the way that the rubber's behaving. Obviously, when the rubber's hot, it moves more, it gets a more fluid and more elastic. And it's to do with how knackered it is, basically. So similar to journalists, if we overheat and we've had to, like, I don't know, run over a bridge or something, then we get all wonky and we're not much use, and like suddenly we have to lie down for a bit, and like the typing slows down, transcription gets a bit weird, that sort of thing. And the tyres have like a not dissimilar problem, especially because in Formula E, so with slick tyres in say Formula 1 or WEC, they use tyre blankets to warm up the tyres to make them hot. To make sure that they start in the right operating window. In Formula E, you have to warm them up on the bumpy road or concrete surface, because Formula E just races on whatever's there. There's no resurfacing like with F1 in Baku, say, or with F1 street circuits. And so it just has to hit it, kind of try and heat up by under braking, and then try and not go too far under more braking. So getting into the quite narrow operating window, which I think is sort of like there's about a 10 degrees where they're kind of good, but which sounds like a really big window. And the sort of optimal one is much smaller than that. But actually 10 degrees, like you have to think about a race like Santiago where in the pit lane it was over 60 centigrade. So, you're reaching a point where you could cook an egg on the tyre anyway. So you're going to shoot through a 10 degree window really very fast. At which point, all of the ridges of the tyre stop operating totally in sequence and perfectly, and start behaving a bit more like some kind of like weird undersea slug. You know, those ones that have like lots and lots of spines as they kind of like crawl across the seafloor, and it's all a bit like tentacular. It all starts doing that.
I would love to do a nature podcast called A Load of Mollusks, where we talk about a different one of these every week.
Yeah. So it all starts doing that. And especially then the treads sort of like spread or can spread under lateral G forces, which is when they suddenly turn into basically like shovels. So a spread piece of tread can then clamp down and pick up a dirty great chunk of tarmac, as we saw in Santiago, as we have seen again in Sanya, where Formula E cars are literally digging up the road because the tyres are grabbing it under lateral G and throwing it, which is quite interesting. But also, but also in Formula E, you have the problem of the tracks are often very dirty. So sometimes they're just dirty because of dirt, like in Hong Kong. It's a dirty road. It's used by heavy goods vehicles coming down to the harbour because it's on the harbour front. A similar problem in Brooklyn at Red Hook. Roads just get dirty because of dirt. And because of regular traffic driving over them. Then there's also places like Punta del Este or Sanya, where we've seen where you just can't stop the sand blowing in from the sea. Sand has, if you've ever run round a corner on some fairly polished concrete, anywhere near a beach or when it's high summer and there's quite a lot of dust around, and suddenly found yourself going a bit sideways and like hitting a wall or like skidding in plimsolls, then that's basically the same thing that happens with sand on a Formula E track. And once you've got the tyres also kind of like starting to go a bit prog, then you get huge amounts of slipping, and you get sort of like very, very strange grip, especially around something like a hairpin. So we saw a little bit of this in Sanya around the
attack.
Sorry?
Alexander Sims,
Yes.
the way he went out. Yeah.
Yeah, and also Lucas di Grassi missing the attack mode activation zone a couple of times.
Which was hilarious.
Yes. So yeah, you get that happening, and you also get I mean, yeah, the cars just become quite uncontrollable, which especially because Formula E cars. So in a Formula One race, the car gets progressively lighter, and as your tyres fall away, you try and push them less hard. So the times when you're going to put the most pressure on the throttle, unless you've been saving tyres specifically to do this later, are when you've just got fresh tyres and probably at the start of the race. So again, on fresh tyres both times, and the second time that you push fairly hard is going to be when you've got less fuel left, so the car is much lighter. Formula E cars don't get lighter. The battery doesn't get any lighter as the energy in it decreases. It does get much hotter, which puts different strains on the system and even on the rear tyres to some extent themselves via the regeneration system. And you have the unique situation in Formula E where, because they do the whole race on a single set of tyres and you've got attack mode and fan boost only activates in the second half of the race, or sort of midway into the race, you have this situation where you could potentially be going 50 kilowatts higher as a maximum output on dog-eared tyres that are well outside the temperature operating window, which is why you suddenly see sort of like drivers doing quite weird, risky things. So you have to time things like attack mode or fan boost activation to having cooled the tyres to where you need them to be, to having saved sufficient amounts of them that you're not just utterly wasting it, in order to leverage all that, which I think is I really hate it when most sport commentary just talks about tyres, but I think it's actually a genuinely interesting and strategic element of this year that I just wanted to talk about that.
And thank you for doing that. I heard some scribbling on the script. Peter, you got some questions about tyres?
I don't actually know.
Oh, okay. No, I just having been a listener to Jimmy Young and Jeremy Vine on Radio 2, when you hear scribbling in the background, you think, he's going to ask a question in a minute. So
very astute, very astute. But no, I don't have any more questions. All
right. Well, thank you so much, because Formula E tyres are something that never get explained on the TV commentary, so that was a real insight. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for that, because that is true. They tend to, because there is no dramatic tyre change, pit stops and things, they tend to sort of gloss over that, don't they?
The final topic I wanted to discuss today was something brought up to me by a chap a person who goes by the name Faceless Photographer, who wrote to me on Twitter and said, what people really want to see from Formula E is sports entertainment. And we then both went back to our nostalgic memories of WWE and watching it in the 90s as kids. And people like Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan and all of the greats of that kind of crossover between sport and acting. And we had a bit of that with the drummed up controversy on Formula E's Instagram of Andre Lotterer not answering Sam Bird's voicemails and text messages. And I mean, it seemed to me like a kind of KSI Logan Paul Instagram influencer fake rivalry. But I wonder, are these kinds of story arcs where we generate rivalries, where we dig into the characters and even create personas and turn people into heels, which for people who don't watch wrestling means bad guys, is this part of how we generate more interest in Formula E, or is it hampering us making Formula E into a seriously considered sport alongside Formula One? Let's start with Pete. What's your opinion?
Hi, yeah, my opinion on that. I did see this just before the podcast actually, and have a quick look at what they were posting about. I didn't really read too much dramatic intent in his statement. I feel almost like Bird has his contact details. He sent him some messages to clear the air. Lotterer didn't feel much like responding. And then they shook hands actually when they saw each other in person. So I think maybe a bit of a storm in a teacup kind of event. I think they were both gentlemanly enough to, not necessarily forgive, but at least to sort of say, okay, you have your point of view, I have mine, let's just get on with it. But I don't think having story arcs, whether they're sort of manufactured by press wanting to create them, or whether they're actually a genuine kind of incident like the Buemi one you were talking about earlier, where he's going around questioning everybody. I don't think that kind of thing takes any seriousness away from the sport. Without over analysing it, really, a lot of sports and a lot of racing in particular have been made more interesting by a key rivalry or a bit of a backhanded dig here and there that they've responded to separately and never really spoken to each other, so it all gets blown out of proportion. I think that all racing, especially, I mean all sports, but all racing especially, where temperatures are high, tempers are high, the stakes are very high, is a perfect breeding ground for this type of thing. And I think it'll happen again in the future for sure, whether it happens naturally or whether there's the odd little twisted story here or there. But I don't think it can do any harm at all.
Hazel.
So I thought the Andre thing was, I thought he was quite out of line to say it. I suspect he doesn't care. Andre's got quite a lot. So I want to say firstly that I respect and like all of the Formula E drivers, but Andre does have an attitude, and he plays up to it a little bit. So he does got a bit of a being the big kind of slightly cool guy, who won't take any crap and whatever.
He reminds me a bit of kind of John Cleland in the 90s touring cars, almost.
I mean, I think for sure he's got sort of a... Yeah, he does have this, persona, I guess. He's obviously also quite dorky and funny, he plays around with Jeb a lot, but he does have this sort of somewhat self-protective kind of distancing, bit too cool for whatever it is thing, and to some extent a bit of a bad boy kind of attempted vibe. I think there's lots of reasons for that, but I don't know, this one felt really off. So Sam is a really nice guy. I am a little bit biased towards Sam. He's one of my favourites, and he's been in the series a long time. So I would admit that as a journalistic bias. But also I think if you compare the way that Sam reacted after the incident in Paris where Andre shore one of the wheels off his car last year, which was really dangerous, and was 100% Andre's fault. Sam wouldn't even say Andre's name to discuss the incident in the press conference after the race. He just kept saying the driver, and that wasn't because he was so angry he couldn't say Andre's name. It was because he considered it, he would only discuss it in terms of an incident where the rules needed to be looked at, not in terms of something where he was cross at an individual.
Yeah. And I agree.
And he was really respectful afterwards, and wouldn't talk about the incident afterwards, except he'd just be like, "That's all behind us." Whereas this felt weird, to be like, "Oh yeah, he called me and I mean, I can even imagine exactly the way Andre said it. And yeah, I mean, Andre has a lot of pride. He wanted that win. He didn't get it. Sam walked away with the championship lead. Still, you can see kind of why tensions were high. I actually didn't think Sam should have been penalised for it, because I thought it was a racing incident, and I feel like the whole thing was a bit of a mess on Techeetah's part. I don't think Techeetah should have humoured Andre by going for a harsher penalty, and bringing tweets to the stewards and all kinds of weird stuff. Like I think everyone was having a trying day. It was very cold. It was very wet. Tensions were high. There was this paranoid atmosphere in the paddock, and I think all of that should have been something that the team diffused him from.
I think there's a parallel issue, though, which is that Bird did exactly the same thing at the same corner to Roland, and although that was kind of a perfect storm of things which put Roland out the race, and it wasn't Sam's fault by any measure, you know, again, there is this kind of thing among Formula E veterans that rubbing is racing, and I think newcomers to Formula E don't really understand that. I'm sure Andre gives as good as he gets, and in fact, he's been the progenitor of incidents before, but it felt to me like in terms of racing incidents, it was maybe 60-40 Sam. I don't know.
I mean, I thought it was fine he got a penalty. I think, to me, it would also have been fine if he didn't. I think it was one of those where it's absolutely down to the stewards to call, and that's why they exist. Because, you know, a lot of the rest of the time. So, say it's the kind of penalty where you leave your car in the wrong state, like you don't put the steering wheel back in or something, or it's not securely turned off, then it's like, well, there's an immediate penalty for that, and it's very clear, and that's just straight up rule breach. Whereas the stewards exist for deciding exactly this kind of thing. To get on the narratives thing, so I think if you look at something like Drive to Survive, the Formula One series, that's come out on Netflix, they clearly tried to build narratives, rivalries to pick out threats. And that's something that you have to do as journalists. It's something that you have to do to create a coherent narrative around a season, to look at something that's interesting, to look at an interesting comparison, or just like to tease something exciting out. But I mean, Formula E had 3 seasons really, of Buemi versus Degrassi. It was a big old slanging match. Say the season 3 press conference before the Montreal finale was really acid. It was incredibly arctic between them. They really, whilst they do respect each other, and they certainly can speak to each other, at that point they were extremely not friends. We're actively antagonising each other. Comparatively, the title fight last year went down to Sam and Jeb, and they had a hug because they both qualified really craply for the race that decided it. So it's, I think there's a lot of different stories you can tell in motorsport. I think it doesn't hurt Formula E to have big coherent rivalry narratives that you can get on board with. It's something, I did a thread of tweets where I was like, it probably helps to pick a favourite when you watch your first race, because then you can follow their specific narrative, even if you can't follow absolutely everything that's going on across the board, because too much stuff happens. So yeah, it helps to give a coherent thread that's easy to follow. It's easy to dip in and out of. And it's something that, big rivalries are something that, as you say, are totally traditional in motorsport. I think when you get down to something like, say, the Rosberg-Hamilton rivalry in Formula One, which was totally real, they loathed each other towards the end. And it was this very paranoid thing in the garage. And because they'd been teenage best friends, there was an obvious narrative there. There was all of, lots of things to tease out there. And so I see why it was totally appealing, but it was also actually quite dull as the dominant narrative for years of Formula One. And so I think you have to be careful to not define the sport by a few rivalries, but by the passion that drives those rivalries, that drives those conflicts, and sort of pick out those elements to look at the real skill, to look at why the drivers are so close, why they get so passionate about things, and things like, particularly in Formula E. I mean, like Formula 1, you can just avoid another driver if you don't want to see them, even if they're in your own team. You can eat separately. You can never leave your bit of the motorhome, you know. But Formula E, everyone eats in the same tent, so it doesn't matter what team you're on. I mean, not the team and crew are separate from media, but that's the only separation.
Yeah, and closing thoughts. How good actually is the food in Formula E's catering tent?
Oh, so like, I won't lie, it's been proper dodgy for a couple of seasons. Like season 3 was better, and then there was sort of nadir in season 4. Particularly Rome was pretty awful. But God, they've got new caterers or something. It's really good this season, like incredible. Like I honestly, it feels sort of like slightly outrageous that we get given it.
Well, that is the kind of insight you can't pay for, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you so much, Hazel Southwell, for coming on, and Peter Greaves, as ever, thank you so much. And by the way, this is the E-Talking podcast from eMotion. I'm Stuart Garlick, and you can find this on hopefully all your favourite podcast networks. Do please subscribe to us on YouTube or whatever you choose to subscribe to us on, and thank you, good night, goodbye.